today. But next time I think we're going to eat gumbo. That's good stuff. Gumbo. Have y'all been to, I just drove around one day and didn't know where to eat. And it's a place in Burlington called the Lost Cajun. Some of the best food I've ever eaten was in New Orleans. I mean, it just suits my palate. But you can get, their lunch special is like a half of a po' boy, shrimp po' boy. And then you can either get that with fries or a jambalaya or gumbo or something like that, a bowl of that. And that's right up my alley. I was telling him about it. He likes gumbo too. Anyway, why didn't I tell you? Y'all need to know that? The Lost Cajun. If you follow on Facebook, they put stuff on there quite a bit. All right, you go in. Do y'all like this kind of stuff? I'll get going about food. They have like lobster bisque, seafood etouffee. I don't know what that sounds, what that's supposed to mean, but it was good. They had like a seafood gumbo, and then they had like a chicken and sausage gumbo. And then anyway, they had 6 different of those, and you come in and they give you a couple spoonfuls of each one of them to try, so you'll know what you want to order. I'm getting you ready for that experience, if that's what you do. If y'all go and you put that on Facebook and you didn't tell me you were going there, I will troll you on Facebook. I sure like that place. I like to go there, but I don't like to eat all by myself. I wish I had somebody to go with me when I went. That's what I do. And you'll know. And you'll feel guilty, and you'll know. And everybody else will know that you went and you didn't take your pastor. I'm just saying, maybe that's happened before, maybe it hasn't. I don't know where in the world my mind is tonight. Like, what else y'all want to talk about?
You get dinner before you came.
I did. At the Old Country Kitchen. I had the buffet. It was quite tasty. I'm sorry, I heard something from over here. Were you asking a question?
I said, I want to know where that about the stars, man.
Mine was pretty good. Mine was pretty good. Probably depends on when you go, huh? Y'all want to talk about Joshua or food? See, Al said, well, have you been to this place and have you been to that place? I said, I haven't been to those places. And so we made a plan. We're going to go, I think we might go eat Thai food one day. He said, here's what he said. He said, wait till you move up here and you got some time to go eat. Then we'll go eat and I'll take you around town. And so we were talking about all the restaurants we'd go eat at. And then he said, oh, if you want to meet some pastors too, I could probably work that. Okay, and if they want to eat where we eat, I'll be glad to meet them. We've been talking about Joshua for a while. I thought we'd go with a new look on our presentations, because sometimes I think you get tired of looking at one thing. And I already misspelled the promise of God, so I was trying to skip away from that one so that y'all wouldn't see that I made a typo. But then I just pointed it out.
Then we all know this. I noticed.
Jim already noticed.
French, steel trap.
The promise of God. Slide 2. Where am I? Anyway, okay, so here's the idea. There's 4 sections to the book of Joshua, and we're starting tonight in the 3rd section. The first one, chapters 1 through 4, were entering the land, and that was mostly crossing the Jordan River. The second, from 5 through 12, is taking the land, and that was the military conquest side of it. And then 13 through 21 is possessing the land, and this is where they say these particular cities went to the descendants of this person and that person. And so, to be quite honest, this is where a lot of people who start reading the book of Joshua say, all right, that's not as interesting as crossing the River Jordan, not as interesting as the military conquest. And here's why. If you were to ask yourself, why is that section so boring to us? The question, I think, is how can we see this section with more life? And so instead of just reading it from, I don't know if y'all know, I just went through a biography of George Washington. And George Washington, for a lot of his early life, was a surveyor. as far as the Ohio Valley and then south, and that's part of where he got sick. And that's part of the illness that carried him around when he was in the war. He actually got while he was surveying, because they didn't have roads and things, so he walked and went with a horse, and he actually surveyed quite a bit of the eastern side of the United States, and which was interesting. But when we read his stuff, we don't want to go see surveying charts, right? We want to hear about the history and the war part. And so that's kind of the same with Joshua. And one of the reasons why I think was talking about different tribes inheriting portions of the Promised Land. One of the reasons why it's not so important is it's not our land. If they were talking about our inheritance and how much we were going to get, and what part we were going to get, and what part our cousins were going to get, I think we'd be much more naturally interested in that. It's the same way when we talk about our kids, and how I love it because when you have young kids, and there's a preschool that my kids went to, connected with a church in Asheboro. And at a certain time during the fourth year when they're 4 years old and they're pre-K, they take them to the fire department. The fire department right next door has a house, and actually let the kids crawl out of the window and down a little ladder. It's actually pretty cool. When my kids were doing it, I took lots of pictures, and it was awesome because they had smoke, and they let them climb out the window. I know other people who are sending their kids there who put up pictures today. And it wasn't half as interesting as when I did it, right? Why? They're not my kids, And so if we could see this maybe in a little bit better light, if we could make ourselves, we could make ourselves think about that in a way that it was our land that we're getting ready to inherit, it would be quite interesting if we talked about it being our victories. In other words, when they go through and list this city and that city, the people who lived there, who made those conquests, were going to live in the area that they had these great military victories. And so it would be as if they're reliving that victory on a regular basis. And so Moses had divvied out the land before now. In fact, as we read, it'll say Moses gave out to some of these, especially on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And so there's possible that some of these people knew that this is the land they'll be inheriting, or maybe they were going around wondering which area. And so when they find their area, they're like, oh yeah, remember, and they would have had war stories, and they would have had all these great victory talks. And so if we looked at them like they were our victories, and then again, these are evidence of the faithfulness of God. And we think about it being our God doing that for us. It's meant to be encouraging. God could have wiped them all out in a plague and just had the people march in and take up housing. But instead, he gave them signs along the way that this was his gift to them. And they were a part of that. And so if we read it in that light, it would maybe be a little bit less boring. There's still some parts where we're just name calling. We're just from this city to that city, and I'm just warning you before we get there. We're going to do just one chapter tonight because we're kind of changing. We're going to talk about some of those changes from one section to the other, but after this we'll speed up quite a bit because I understand that if I'm in my study and I'm reading some of this and I'm going, oh my goodness, y'all probably feel that pain on Wednesday night. So we'll speed up a little bit through some of this when we get done with tonight, like we did last week. So, chapter 13, verse 1, when Joshua was an old man. So that escalated rather quickly, right? Except that most of what Joshua did, he did as an older man. He and Caleb were the two oldest men in all the area. Why? The only ones in that generation to live through being in the Promised Land for 40 years. So at the beginning of the 40 years, they were young. Then they had the 40 years in the wilderness. And then they had all the military victories and things like that. So I don't know how old he was when he first went into the Promised Land, but 40 years later, he was 40 years older. And then however long it took him. So especially when a lot of the people during this time weren't known for living too long for various reasons. They didn't have hospitals and things like that. So the age expectancy wasn't super high. And so, but now it seems like to me, instead of Joshua's all of a sudden old, it seems like he was old, but God was sustaining him. And now that he's done with what he needs Joshua to do, Joshua's starting to show his age. Okay, and it's time for that transition. We still have a long way for the book to go, but Joshua still has to divvy out the property. And that's his role as the leader, to kind of take Moses, the way he set some of it up, and all of the rest, how God wanted it set up, and divide it among the tribes. So when Joshua was an old man, the Lord said to him, "You're growing old." How many of you like to be told you're growing old? And so if God himself walks in and be like, I don't know, you're getting kind of old. It seems like, you're like, yeah, God, thanks, Captain Obvious over here. I was playing golf with some pastors, and pastors are kind of interesting people, but three of us hit good balls right out in the middle of the fairway. This is years and years and years ago, the pastor's conference. And one guy pulled his into the water, and we all kind of snickered in the back. And one guy says, "Well, three of us hit pretty good shots." But then he called the name of the guy who did it. He said, "If you'd hit a good shot, we all four would have hit good shots. But since you didn't, only three of us hit good shots." And it's like, there's always got to be that one person in the crowd who says what everybody's thinking. I think that's fun. But he says, "You're growing old, and much land remains to be conquered." Okay, so that's an interesting section too. Joshua has conquered a lot of that area. He went in at the middle, he went down, he went up, and he conquered a lot of that. But what God is saying is, listen, it's interesting because you've kind of cleared out a lot of this, and the tribes that go in, they'll kind of finish things up, right? We've knocked out the kings and the armies and the inhabitants of the big cities and some of the little cities, but a lot of the areas still south and a lot of the areas still north was yet to be conquered. And God said, when you start heading in that direction, I'm still going to give all those to you. But there's some conquering still to go. And so the substantial amount of the promise, enough to start divvying out the land, and this is God telling them this is what we're going to do. So he said this is the territory that remains. All the regions of the Philistines and the Geshurites, the larger territory of the Canaanites, extending from the stream of Shihor on the border of Egypt, so all the way back down to Egypt, is part of the promised land. And he's saying that y'all went up through here and came back, but you didn't go all the way. He's saying, I still want to give you all of that, so count that in the inheritance. Northward to the boundary of Ekron, it includes the territory of the 5 Philistine rulers of Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron, land of the Avites. In the south also remains to be conquered. In the north, the following area has not yet been conquered. All the land of the Canaanites. So the Canaanites were all over. Of course, Canaan land, they were Canaanites. Including Meir, which belongs to the Sidonians, stretching northward to Aphek on the border of the Amorites. In the land of the Gibeonites and all of Lebanon mountain area to the east, from Baal Gad below Mount Hermon to Lebo Hamath, to all the hill country from Lebanon to Misrephoth-maim. Sorry, I'm reading on a little tiny screen down here, so I can keep up with the slides. Including all the land of Sidonians. I myself will drive these people out of the land ahead of the Israelites. So God's saying, listen, I'm still going to be doing this for you. So be sure to give this land to Israel as a special possession, just as I commanded you. So this is God saying to Joshua, don't skimp. Be generous with the provision, because I'm still giving. I've conquered the certain portion, but I'm still expanding this territory. And if you look at eventually what David and Solomon were able to amass, it is much bigger than what they're doing here. Include all of this territory as Israel's possession when you divide the land among the 9 tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh. So there were 2.5 over here, 9.5 over here. And where we see this passage coming from, the first 7 verses, is that really, even though they have some work to do, God's sufficient promise is there. He is taken care of. Up to this point, everything, He has literally given it to them into their hands. They really didn't do a whole lot except take it. And He's reestablishing the fact that even though there's a little bit more to do, even though Joshua's getting old, and there's still a lot of land left to conquer, God's still going to give them the land. And I saw this great quote, and it says this: the mortality of God's servants never handicaps the everlasting God. So we might think, well, I'm getting to the end of some things. That doesn't mean that God has to stop doing those things. Okay, God just can reload and start again, okay? So in the same way that when Moses bowed out, Joshua took over, there's some sense that God is already preparing the people for Joshua to bow out. And there's just a cycle of generation after generation of people being faithful to do the things that they've been asked to do. And so everything's hunky-dory, right? He says you need to conquer all these Canaanites, and we never hear about Canaanites ever again in the Bible, right? And the Canaanites are going to give David and generation after generation so much trouble. So what happened that, we're kind of looking at it from reverse, and we can see that the Canaanites are going to be a big problem. The Philistines, other people that are mentioned here, Gath and some of those people are going to pop back up. What happened? So we get a little bit of a clue. They're on the eastern side. He's just talking about the 2.5 tribes that settled east of the Jordan River in this passage, and then he'll go into the other side. So he says, half the tribe of Manasseh and the tribes of Reuben and Gad had already received their grants of land on the east side of the Jordan. Moses, the servant of the Lord, had previously assigned that land to them. Their territory extended from Aurora on the edge of the Arnon Gorge, including the town in the middle of the gorge, but the plain behind Medeba as far as Dibon. You can see where this gets a little bit. It may not seem interesting to you, but I'm trying to pronounce all of these, so I'm trying to. It also includes the town of the king Sihon of the Amorites, who had reigned in Heshbon, extended as far as the borders of Ammon. It included Gilead, the territory of the kingdoms of Geshur and Maacah, all of Mount Hermon, and Bashan as far as Silicate. And the territory of King Og. So as he's going through and saying Sihon and Og, these are people who would have been famous as the people who they defeated during that time. So Og of Bashan, who had reigned at Ashtaroth and Edrei, King Og was the last of the Rephites, for Moses had attacked them and driven them out. But Israel, this is where it gets interesting. Israelites failed to drive out the people of Geshur and Maacah, so they continued to live among the Israelites to this day. What happened? God says, I'm going to give them to you. And then it says the Israelites did not drive them out. All they had to do is say, okay, God, we're headed that way next. And hold out their hands and wait for God to literally give them those people and give them those cities. Why did they not do it? This is a satellite picture looking up into the Mediterranean. And on the left side, I get real confused if I look at that backwards. You can see up the V that's coming in on the left side is the Nile River and coming all the way down, moving around. On the right side, if you look up, that V goes this way and looks up into the area that turns green at the top right. Everything down here on the left is Egypt and becomes Africa. Everything on the right is modern day Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran. How much of that looks like desert? All of it, except at the top right up there, you see that green area and that little body of water right there at the green area? The little body of raw water is the Red Sea that Jesus calmed. Going up from that is the Jordan River up into the mountains. And that whole area is the land that Israel inherited as the promised land. Choice land. Right? When they got it, what did they do? No more crisis. No more life and death. They were faithful through the big portion, the big battles, right? Trying to be faithful through that. And God said, as you go and you settle into your lands, keep clearing people out, for this is to be yours and yours alone. It's a picture of holiness. I think all of that, trying to clear out and just leaving room for God and you, okay? And it speaks to the human condition, I think, that they said, once the big battles were over, time for me to enjoy my land. Kind of tired of being at war with everybody. And so they begin this process where they start letting people stay. The big lessons that they learn aren't so big anymore, right? And so what you see is, in verse 13, you could call it waning vigilance. What does that mean? You were hyper-vigilant for a while, now? What happens when you start a diet? First few days, I'm not eating that. It's not on my diet. If I start eating things like that now, I'll never lose weight. 2 weeks later, what happens? Little of that ain't gonna hurt. Right? 3 weeks later, no more diet. Isn't that the way it goes? January 1st, I'm not going to do that anymore. January 9th, little of that's not so bad. I was kind of extreme for a while, right? January 14th, 15th. I'm sorry, it's a new year. Why am I living like it's January 1st? What New Year's resolution? Right? And it starts off so small. You're on a diet, you haven't eaten sugar in weeks. One cookie. What does that one cookie do to you? You're gonna eat one? Right. It's like Lay's potato chips, right? Open a bag and I'm like, I'm gonna eat a potato chip. Said no one ever. Because you eat one, what's gonna happen? What the Bible talks about in other ways, a little yeast, right, will leaven the whole piece. And so it's a matter, why, when so many of these things are about lessons that apply to us today. And so one of the lessons, right, was when the children of Israel got out of Egypt, they were to eat unleavened bread. And the symbolism was the bread won't have time to rise when they'd eat it in a hurry. So when they baked it, it was like a flat bread, and sometimes it would be even hard like a cracker. Today, Jewish people, when they celebrate Passover, actually have crackers. And it says the body of Christ broken for you, because when they do that, it actually kind of breaks the bread. Okay, because it's unleavened bread. They call it a matzah cracker. In some of your Whole Foods and places like that, you can actually go and get the crackers that symbolize, much more of a saltine than, say, a big loaf of bread that had risen. And so the idea was, keep it clean. And so the children of Israel for years and years, when it came time for Passover, they cleaned out their whole house to make sure not any yeast was left. Right? But it's a sign of holiness that you take everything out that doesn't need to be there because a little bit. All right, so you have a fruit basket and one piece goes rotten. What happens? You best take it out, right? Because if not, everything else will spoil faster. Explain that to me scientifically. I know there is an explanation scientifically, right? Has to be. But we all know it's true. And so this little verse of scripture, verse 13, Israelites failed to drive out. They weren't even called to drive out. They were just called to stand there and let God give it to them again. But they didn't do it, so these people continue to live among the Israelites to this day. So what else could we call it? We could call it incomplete obedience, which is disobedience. That's another way of saying that. To not obey 100% of the way is to disobey however much of the way that you didn't go. And so the problem is when there's not an immediate crisis. Whoever told a white lie, did hell come bring up and grab you and take you down into the depths of it and you burn forever? Or what happened? Yeah? Feel guilty. And after a while you realize you could get by with that. Right? You know why kids don't misbehave, don't behave all the time? They think you're watching them all the time. I tell my kids I see everything you do even if I'm not in the room. I use every opportunity available to let them know that I found out something they didn't think I knew. It is to my advantage that they think I'm everywhere looking at everything. Right? Amen. And so, say what? I just want them to always be thinking if they do something wrong, I'm going to find out. And so, sometimes you'll have two kids and one of them will push you and try to get away with everything, and one of them will be so super sensitive they'll do something, and then they're afraid you're going to find out, and they just can't do it. They can't hide. They just come screaming, I did it. It's like, I didn't even know something had been done. And so, but the idea is, a lot of times in our life, if we're talking about holiness, we can do something wrong and get away with it. There's no immediate crisis. When they were winning wars or losing wars, one person stole silver, some cloth, a couple other things that hid them, and the whole nation paid for it. That was an immediate crisis. Everybody had to come to Jesus moment, or come to Joshua moment. Right? And they cut that out. Not anymore. The tribes are left to themselves. Spread it out. And all of a sudden, do you do or do you not do? It's not a huge issue. And so I think it's just a symbol that they got something really great. They're living in the land. They're eating fruit that they didn't plant. And the immediacy of living for God and complete obedience was gone. And the minute it was gone, the immediacy of it, the crisis of it, they stopped obeying fully. So I think that was interesting. Verse 14 brings up a different topic, one we hadn't talked about a whole lot in Joshua. So it said Moses did not assign any allotment of land to the tribe of Levi. Instead, as the Lord had promised them, their allotment came from the offerings burned on the altar to the Lord, the God of Israel. There's one more verse at the end of this that both talks about the Levites, so I thought we'd read these both. This is actually the last verse of the chapter. But Moses gave no allotment of the land to the tribe of Levi. As he gives out other tribes things, he tries to explain why Levi got nothing. For the Lord, the God of Israel, had promised that he himself would be their allotment. So the Levites get two things. When somebody gives their tithe and brings it in the storehouse, that's for them for the most part. People say, well, that's for building the temple. The temple was built on a tax, not a tithe. So most of the tithe went to the Levites. And then it says this, that God himself was their allotment. So as every other group got this land given to them, the Levites were allowed to live in particular cities all around. And then when everybody else would bring in their tithe, they would give that to the Levites, and the Levites would use that, yes, to run the temple, but also to keep themselves going. And so I think it's interesting. Y'all want to look at some Levite math, how God took care of the Levites. There's 12 tribes. I put up there who's missing, because the Levites got nothing when it came down to it. 11 tribes left, all gave 10%. So let's assume they were all get 100, and they each gave 10%. How much do the Levites get? 110. Every other tribe, what are they left with? 90. Were the Levites taken care of? 20. And so, interestingly enough, out of that, eventually what the Levites were to do was to help take care of the poor. And so Malachi, you remember the story about if you don't bring your tithe, you'll be robbing from God? If you look at the context of that, it was a direct attack on the priests, the Levites, who were not giving a tithe of what they had to help take care of the poor. Because they had what was called a temple tithe. And so when you brought stuff in, all the stuff you brought in, so everybody else had 90 left, you brought in 110, but the Levites were to give their tenth and take care of the poor people in the area who didn't take care of themselves. And so they still had some left over. But it was interesting to me that their stealing from God was not given to take care of the poor, which I thought was interesting. So Malachi is a different story for a different day. What do you think? What do you think? The Levites, would you want to be a Levite? Would you not want to be a Levite? Everybody else got land with their name on it. And God's like, I'm their gift. One of the popular themes in Psalms, and this is David writing, he uses the term portion. And what he says in a lot of his prayers is, God is my portion. Okay? You, Lord, are my portion. So everybody else was thinking they got a gift from God. The Levites are thinking we got God. What would you rather have? Right? I think it would be better to get the giver than to get a gift from the giver. And so it's not a small point here that the Levites were taken care of, but the Levites got to continue in the presence of God. As they built the temple, regular people would never enter the holy place or the Holy of Holies. And the Levites still got to enjoy that presence. Right? And so a lot of times, all right, so maybe here's a good question. Would you rather get eternal life and value that higher, or the God who gives us eternal life? I heard a person talking about heaven, and they said, I'm going to go see my aunts and uncles, and I'm going to go see my grandparents, and I'm going to go see all that. And I thought, I'm going to go thank the person who got me there first. Right? Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there may you be also. The whole point of heaven is to be with God for eternity. Me seeing people I've never met in my life is a byproduct. It's a happy, it's gravy. Right? It's not the main meal, but it helps. Icing on the cake, as it were. And so my grandfather died when my mom was 16. I've never met the man a day in my life. The church that my great-grandparents went to is in Greensboro and recently got demolished. As a part of that, several people began sharing stories online, things that they knew about different people, and so I began to see some of those. I saw pictures that I'd never seen before of my grandfather. And one of the first videos, he passed away, I want to say in the early 60s. And I know many people didn't have a video recorder back then, wouldn't have sound and all of that, but somebody took a moving picture. I'm pretty sure it was black and white. And they were showing people leaving one day, and I saw my grandfather holding my mother's hand as a little girl, and my uncle's hand as a littler boy, if that's not the way to say it, and walk out. I saw about 3 seconds of him. It's the only time I've ever seen a moving picture. Probably the only one that exists because he died so long ago. He was a veteran. I was talking to Al today, and he said that when he needs something, he'll go to the VA in Durham. That's where my grandfather passed away. I've got his death certificate. And so I was able to see that online through Ancestry.com and know that that's where he passed away. I was able to read the names of the other gentlemen who passed there that day, and I thought that was a neat connection. I look forward to the day I can see my grandfather in heaven. But he won't be my very first visit. Right? And so what do we want more? Do we want the gift? Or do we want the giver? What's that? It's a popular song that's been out for a little while. Help me want the healer more than the healing. And it's just a great reorienting of, a lot of times we want to receive gifts, but do we neglect the giver of the gifts? I think we've all given a gift to a child and we're like, eh. And what do? You want to say, in this life, we get very few opportunities. We need to be grateful for everything we get, right? And so it's an important lesson to teach to our kids and to our children, but we need to teach them to be grateful for the giver of that eternal life and not just for the gift that that eternal life is. So then we have quite a bit of reading here to give away the other two tribes a little bit. I want to keep reading. Next week's going to be very hard to keep reading all this, but I like to read it just in the nature of the fact that it was written first time, which is as almost as a pep speech. Hey, look, this is what we've got. This is where we've come. It would be like a coach at the end of the season going back and listing all the wins that they had. So Moses had assigned the following area to the clans of the tribe of Reuben. Their territory extended from Aroer on the edge of the Ammon Gorge, including the town. Did I read that already? No, that was the other part. Included Heshbon to the towns of the plain, Dibon, Bamoth, Baal, Beth, Baal, Meon. So some of these verses are extremely short, so it's not that bad. Jahaz, Kedemeth, I go faster if I'm going to pronounce all these. Kiriathaim, Sibma, Zerah. So people would be cheering and doing all of these when they read this out loud. Beth Peor, the slopes of Pisgah, and Beth Jeshimoth. It's interesting to me how many local churches are named after some of these old, like Gilead and some of those other places. The land of Reuben also included the towns of the plain and the entire kingdom of Sihon. Sihon was the Amorite king who had reigned in Heshbon, was killed by Moses, along with the leaders of the Median, Evi, Rakim, Zur, Hur, Reba, princes living in the region were all allied with Sihon. The Israelites also killed Balaam, son of Beor, who used magic to tell the future. See, if I skipped over all of that, you wouldn't have known that Balaam, son of Beor, used magic to tell the future. It doesn't say he used magic to try to tell the future. That's interesting, isn't it? It doesn't say he was accused of doing it. It says he did it. The Jordan River marked the western boundary for the tribe of Reuben. The towns of the surrounding villages, this area was given as a homeland to the clans of the tribe of Reuben. Moses had assigned the following area to the tribes of the clans of the tribe of Gad. Their territory included Jazer, the towns of Gilead, half the land of Ammon, all the town of Eror, just west of Rabbah. It extended from Heshbon to Ramoth Mizpah to Betonim, and from Mahanaim to Lo-Debar. In the valley of Beth Haram, Beth Nimrah, Succoth, Zaphon, and the rest of the kingdom of King Sihon of Heshbon, the western boundary ran along the Jordan River, extended as far north as the tip of the Red Sea, and then turned eastward. The towns and their surrounding villages in this area were given as a homeland to the clans of the tribe of Gad. Moses had assigned the following area to the clans of the half-tribe of Manasseh, and their territory extended from Mahanaim, including the town of Bashan, all the former kingdom of King Og, and the 60 towns of the Jair and Bashan. It also included half of Gilead and King Og's royal cities of Ashtaroth and Edrei, and this was given to the clans, the descendants of Machir, who was Manasseh's son. And the allotments Moses made while he was on the plains of Moab, across from the Jordan River, east of Jericho. So Moses did all of these while he was looking at the land that he would never see. Into the promised land, he was giving away some of these areas. So we see here that just repeated encouragement. We beat this one, beat this one, beat this one. This is now our land. Keep doing this. And eventually they gave up and did not do those things. So the study questions. What happens when you let the little things in your life go unchecked? Backfire. And they get big things, right? You got that great diet you're on, you're making progress, you're losing weight. That one piece of pie, man, there it went. Right? Eat that piece of pie, what do you think of it? I'm going to do that again. I'm going to eat another piece of pie. Start thinking about pie. Are y'all like me? You all like pie? You probably like pie. Don't judge me. Why is the recounting of God's past acts of faithfulness so important?
Because the strength to face today's problems.
The same God who won those victories wants to help me win today's victory. I think churches, individual churches, don't tell enough of their stories until funerals. We talk about the faithfulness of this person and that person. You know? And then as the last one, as a believer, you've received an inheritance. Do you view the gift of salvation more important than the giver of salvation? I hope not. Tempting. The gift is a good gift. But the giver's better. Any questions? What if we pass some of these out? And I'll just, if somebody raises their hand, they'd like to pray for one of these people, I'll just hand you one, and we could spend some time praying for all of these kids and for the message that they'll receive when they come here October 17th. If y'all are interested, okay, I'm going to pass one over. And then some of them, all they wrote down was their name. And then some of them wrote down a little bit more than that. I got two sticking together. that one came out of that one. Sorry. You got the head coach. 2 left. Huh?
Oh, I think
You gonna take one? I'm out. So, here's the way I look at it. God meets people where they are. A lot of times people who need God where they are won't come to a church service. But many of them come to school, or their kids come to school, or the teachers come to school. And what you'll find out if you spend a whole lot of time in schools is real life. The problems in our community don't skip our schools. If drugs are rampant, they're in the schools. If there's issues, they're in the schools. So when we love on schools, when we love on coaches, when we love on teachers, I think we're loving the least of these in the places that they are. We have opportunity to reach out with the gospel of Jesus Christ to kids who, if you look at that list and look at those kids, the statistics are, last time I read for Alamance County was a little better than Randolph County, which is where I was from. Randolph County, 9% of the people any given Sunday attend a church where they'll hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. Alamance County was a little bit higher, somewhere around 15% every Sunday will actually be in a church where they can hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. So pick out of those kids 15% who maybe already know and the rest don't. The rest maybe haven't been raised in church, maybe don't know who Joshua is, maybe don't know who Jesus is. We're going to get an opportunity to share the gospel, tell them about church and some other things. I think prayer matters. I think the Holy Spirit of God can work on their hearts well before they hear a message to soften and open them up for that. And so I think if we pray for that list, I gave you a list of the people on the team. The coaches are on the right, a lot of the students on the left, the ones of the 12 by their name are the ones we're going to feed who are in the 12th grade. So we're not feeding that whole list of kids. We're just feeding, I think they said there are 26 seniors this year. They're getting ready to go out and live life. They're getting ready to go out and go to college or do whatever's next for them in their life, get a job, go to Alamance Community College or whatever they end up doing. And this is going to be a moment of time where God has an opportunity to speak in their life. I'd like for that whole night to be covered in prayer before we ever get there. I'd like for every human being who steps in that room to be covered in prayer before they walk in that room. I would like to be able to give them bread to eat and the bread of life to feast on for the rest of their life, that they'll never hunger again. And so I'd like for us to spend a little bit of time praying. If we have other prayer requests, we want to add people to the prayer list, that's fine too. And then spend at least some time praying